If exploding corpses and blades of cosmic energy are your thing, then the Warrior of the Void build is for you. Hello all, it's Codiak here, one half of the team behind Legion Gaming, and today I'm breaking down one of my favorite endgame builds in Wolcen, Lords of Mayhem. You may have clicked on this video wondering what the heck is a Warrior of the Void. Well, let me tell you. This build is all about getting up close and personal with your enemies, but it's not that axe in your hand that's going to be doing the work. The Warrior of the Void build is designed around ailments, tapping into both Aether and Poison to deliver a devastating 1-2 punch. The build excels at clearing levels fast while also providing enough damage to easily take down bosses. At its core, Warrior of the Void is an offensive build, but as you get deeper into the endgame, there are some defensive options that become crucial to your survival. We'll talk about all that and more, but first, let's dive into the abilities. Our first core ability is Anomaly. This high damage ability allows us to manipulate enemy position, which is a crucial component of the overall output of the build. In terms of skill modifiers, you'll want to take Auspicious Cosmology, which increases the ailment damage to enemies inside the vortex. You should also pick up Rending of Matter, which allows you to cast Anomaly twice. While this is to create for more controlling of large groups, it also provides you a huge boost in damage. I also pick up Event Horizon, which damages enemies when they are pulled in by the vortex. Remaining points should be spent on increasing ailment damage, ability duration, and ability area of effect. Our next ability is Plague Burst, and while some may argue that this is an inconsequential pick because it doesn't do a great deal to help with bosses, I find that most players will get more benefit out of this ability than something else. In conjunction with Anomaly, Plague Burst can decimate a group of enemies in the blink of an eye. The first skill modifier I take is Blades of Pestilence, which increases the chance to inflict ailments on enemies hit by explosions. Additionally, you'll want to pick up Noxious Smog, which continues to damage enemies after the initial explosion. While the damage from the exploding corpses is substantial, the ability to stack up dozens of mobs with Anomaly means you'll have dozens of poison clouds chipping away at the enemy. Remaining points can be spent how you'd like, but I prefer to take advantage of the 1-point modifiers that increase ailment chance and damage, increase area of effect, and increase direct damage. Our next ability, Infinity Blades, acts as our secondary tier of damage in our willpower dump. This build doesn't require you to maintain certain thresholds of willpower or rage, and is a lot more accessible because of it. I'll admit the skill modifiers for this ability aren't great, but there are a few that rise above the rest. Field of Sapience adds a block component to the ability which taps into our Gates of Fate. Additionally, if the ability blocks, it inflicts status on the enemies, which also taps into our Gates build. Material Sinkhole is also a must because it applies a debuff that increases the damage enemies take from spells. With such an emphasis on Anomaly and Plague Burst, this is a critical part of why we're using Infinity Blades. The remaining points can be spent how you'd like, just don't take Gusts in Dark Spaces. We want to keep Infinity Blades an Aether-based ability for ultimate synergy down the line. Our final offensive ability is Bleeding Edge, and yes, I know, boo Bleeding Edge, but here's the deal. You gotta do what works, and right now Bleeding Edge gets the job done. Bleeding Edge is your rage dump, and it does a hell of a job. For modifiers, I choose to take Astral Orbit, which increases the skill's duration and forces the axis to follow my character as I move. Additionally, I take Despotic Perseverance, which increases damage per ailment stack. Since we're investing heavy into ailments, this is a must-pick modifier. Finally, I choose both Wicked Swing and Self-Adjusting Principle, which aren't game changers but ultimately do have some impact on the overall damage output of this ability. In terms of mobility, I recommend picking up Aether Jump, which allows you to teleport and reposition on the fly. As long as you keep an eye on your willpower, this will be a more important ability than your dodge roll. For modifiers, I take anything that reduces the willpower cost, including Breath of Time. I also pick up the 3-point modifier March of the Time Devourers, which reduces the cooldown of the ability and allows you to cast it multiple times at the cost of higher willpower. Finally, you'll probably want to pick up Fragments of Aether, which can synergize nicely since enemies with stasis take additional damage. Remaining points can be spent how you'd like, but I recommend anything that reduces willpower cost and generates willpower. For the sake of this build, we won't be talking about a 5th slot ability since I want this guide to be accessible to everyone, from story players to endgame dungeon divers. When it comes to this build's attributes, I recommend heavily investing into Wisdom. Warriors of the Void rely on ailments to deal damage, and with every point of Wisdom you invest, you'll increase your chance to apply an ailment. You'll also want to invest some points in toughness. It's a balancing act because the further you get into the endgame, the more likely it is you'll get one shot. But play around with your point distributions and find a comfortable ratio of wisdom to toughness. At the time of making this guide, I have around 730 points in wisdom and 400 in toughness. Of course, depending on your gear, some things will fluctuate, but as far as allocating points go, wisdom and toughness are your go-tos. The Warrior of the Void build starts off as a pure build, but as you can see from the completed chart, things start to break off as our needs shift. In terms of major nodes, we'll start off with a Tristan Strategist and the Scholar tree. This increases your ailment chance score by 60% and is the foundation of where the damage in this build comes from. Next, we'll swing up to the Kabbalist tree and pick up Immortal Offering. Because enemies will be loaded up with ailments, this is a true staple of the build. It'll provide you with a constant damage boost, which is essential to endgame progression. Still in the Kabbalist tree, we'll take Grievous Afflictions, which allows us to apply a second different ailment during a singular attack. From here, we'll keep expanding up to the Time Weaver tree and pick up Which Time Cannot Heal. This is where status starts to come into play. Enemies that are afflicted with status and are hit take the initial damage, but then also take the damage from the attack a couple seconds later. We'll continue in this tree and pick up Dire Juncture, which may seem like an odd choice to many of you early endgame players, but it's an incredible pick as you get further along in Wolcen, providing you with opportunities to react to big spikes of damage before they happen. Now at this point, we start to branch out. For most early game players, focus on reaching the nodes we just discussed, but as you start climbing towards level 60, 70, and 80, you'll have to make some choices. If staying alive is becoming a problem, break on through the Sentinel tree and pick up Kingless Aegis in the Praetorian tree, which gives you a 6% block chance and allows any weapon to block. After that, bang a left and head down the Siegebreaker tree and pick up Salvatore Anchor. This node relies heavily on the gear you've collected in your experience. For me, my bags are loaded with legendary and unique items, so it's an obvious choice. Once you take the elevated gain node right next to Salvatore Anchor, you'll want to find yourself a heavy helm and chest, which increases your resistances exponentially. This is so critical to survival in the endgame. If you prefer to keep building offensively, first you do have some options. I pick up the Wild card, which increases critical hit chance by 60% on all attacks and spells. Heading left out of the Kabbalist tree, stop and pick up Feast for the Crows, which gives you 2% life leech. I know it's not an offensive gain, but you're there and you might as well take an easy survivability node. Next, head into the Abyssal Shaper tree and reach Occult Affliction, which increases your occult damage by 5% for every curse stack an enemy has. Because we're investing so heavily into ailments and occult damage, specifically, this is a no-brainer. In terms of lesser nodes, I recommend picking up the following. Back in the Praetorian tree, I like to pick up Sacred Oath, which applies 2 weakness stacks to enemies within 7 meters after blocking an attack, and additionally, I take Persistence Hunting in the Ranger tree, which further increases the damage status enemies take. As you can see, this build is designed around ailment, but as you get further into the endgame, you'll need a way to survive. Because we're investing so heavily on offensive nodes, we do have to make the conscious choice to break away and take nodes like Kingless Aegis and Salvatore Anchor. Those nodes, while awkward to reach, mean that you'll be able to stay right in the middle of the fray, which is exactly what you want to do with an Anomaly and Plague Burst build. So let's talk about gearing. You may be watching this video at a different point in your Wolcen experience, and that's absolutely fine. The same rules apply if you're level 20 or level 80. Of course, you'll always want gear with wisdom, which ties directly into our ailments. Additionally, you'll want to find gear with ailment chance to score, which further proves the point. Additionally, you'll want to pick up any items that increase occult damage and occult ailment chance to score. This ties directly into the Gates of Fate decisions we just talked about. After that, focus on critical damage and critical chance to score, which is never a bad option. Of course, never pass up on anything that increases resistances, which ties directly into our defensive Gates of Fate. And you can never go wrong with anything that reduces the cooldown of abilities. In terms of weapons, you'll need something that gives you access to both warrior and mage abilities. In my current setup, I have a one-handed axe and catalyst. Of course, look for items that reinforce the priorities of passive benefits we just talked about. In terms of sockets, here's what I recommend. For offensive sockets, aim for offensive 2 and offensive 3. This will allow you to utilize Amber, which increases your Aether damage and/or the effect of status on enemies. For defensive sockets, you'll really only want defensive 3. This will allow you to utilize the All Resistances boost from Alexandrite, which is essential to survivability in the endgame. In terms of support sockets, you'll want support 2, which further allows us to increase our Aether damage with Ambers. Warrior of the Void is one of the most satisfying builds I've used in Wolcen thus far. It's flashy, dramatic, and damn effective, and it's all by design. What's critically important is understanding the order with which you use your abilities. Plague Burst should always be first, regardless of if you take the Disgrace skill modifier or not. By activating this first, you guarantee that any enemies you kill will explode and drop a poison cloud. If you open with Anomaly, sure, you do a ton of damage, but you won't reap the benefit of Plague Burst, at which point you might as well take something else. The engagement looks like this. Pop Plague Burst and run into the fray. Drop 2 anomalies that will suck in the largest number of mobs and start lashing out with your Infinity Blades. As your rage builds, spam Bleeding Edge and watch as enemies crumble around you. Some fights will be over quicker than others before Anomaly and Plague Burst are off cooldown, but most will require you to recast them. Don't be stingy, and if you need to, pop a willpower potion to keep that constant damage rolling out. Rinse and repeat with groups of enemies and you'll be facing the boss in no time. As I mentioned before, bosses can be a bit tricky since Plague Burst doesn't do a whole lot to help out in those situations. You can drag mobs to the boss room, which I do quite a bit, but as you get to some of the harder endgame expeditions, it's a risky move. Don't be afraid to tap into your aspect of the apocalypse if you need a breather, but you should be fine as long as you're not taking major damage to the face. This is not the type of build where you stand your ground and self-heal through it. You will never survive. The Warrior of the Void build can take you quite far into the endgame. If you are struggling to find a build that works for you, give it a try and let us know how you make out. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to drop us a like and subscribe to Legion Gaming for more Wolcen videos in your feed. We also invite you to join Legion Gaming on Discord with over 2,500 members across dozens of games. It's a great place to hang out and share your passion for video games with others. My name is Codiak, and from everyone here at Legion Gaming, thanks for watching and play on.